A $3 piece of beef and 8 hours of doing absolutely nothing produced the best dinners most Mexican-American families ever sat down to. That was the crock-pot promise in the 1970s, and millions of working mothers collected on it every single weeknight. They took dishes that had simmered on Abuela stoves for generations and handed them over to a plug-in ceramic pot that asked for nothing but patience. And then, somewhere between the microwave and the drive-thru, those dinners disappeared. Number 18 on this list is a cut of meat most kitchens today would not even recognize. And number 6 used a wild plant growing right in the yard and turned it into a proper dinner. Here are 25 forgotten Mexican crock-pot dinners from the 1970s that no one makes anymore, so hit subscribe, because these deserve to be remembered. Number 25, chicharrón en salsa verde. Frayed pork cracklings braised in a tomatillo and serrano chile sauce until they went from crunchy to soft and absorbed every bit of tangy green heat. The crock-pot was perfect for this because chicharrón needs time to soak up liquid, and the slow cooker gave it hours to transform completely. What started as brittle pork rinds turned into tender, saucy pieces of meat that held together just long enough to land on a warm tortilla. Families across the Southwest served this with a side of arroz rojo and called it dinner. The tomatillo sauce broke down during those hours and wrapped itself around every piece until the whole pot was soaked through. Most people today only know chicharrón as a crunchy snack from a gas station bag. The braised dinner version, the one that turned into a full meal in a slow cooker, has quietly disappeared from home kitchens. Number 24, polo en mole rojo. Chicken legs and thighs slow cooked in a dark red mole made from toasted dried chilies, sesame seeds, peanuts, warm spices, and a piece of Mexican chocolate. The crock-pot turned mole into a weeknight possibility because the sauce needed hours of low heat to meld together, and the slow cooker did it without anyone standing over a blender or a pot. The chicken cooked directly in the mole and absorbed the flavor down to the bone. By evening, the sauce had thickened into a deep, complex coating that clung to every piece. You served it over white rice with warm corn tortillas on the side and a sprinkle of toasted sesame seeds on top. In the 1970s, families who made mole at home did it regularly because the crock-pot removed the hardest part. Today, homemade mole has become a holiday project that most families only attempt once or twice a year. Number 23. Calabacitas con puerco. Chunks of pork shoulder cooked low with diced Mexican squash, fresh corn kernels, tomato, onion, and a couple of roasted poblano peppers. The crock-pot softened the squash until it melted partway into the sauce while the pork went tender. It was a summer dish in the 70s, made when the garden was producing more calabacitas than anyone knew what to do with. The corn sweetened the pot, and the poblano gave it a mild heat that balanced everything. Families served it in shallow bowls with a stack of tortillas on the side. The whole meal came from the garden and the butcher counter, and the crock-pot did all the rest. Most families today buy their squash pre-cut in a bag and have stopped making this from scratch entirely. Number 22. Quilorio, shredded pork cooked down in a thick paste of dried chilies, vinegar, cumin, and oregano, until the meat was almost dry and every strand was coated in dark, tangy spice. Quilorio came from Sinaloa and crossed the border with families who settled in California and Arizona during the mid-20th century. The crock-pot version started with pork shoulder braised until tender, then shredded and mixed back into the reduced chile paste for another round of slow cooking. The result was a deeply seasoned, slightly crispy filling that went into burritos, tacos, or straight onto a warm flour tortilla with nothing else needed. Quilorio kept well in the refrigerator for days, which made it a working family's best friend. A single batch fed the household through midweek. Outside of Sinaloan communities, most Mexican Americans today have never heard of it. Number 21. Albondigas soup. Meatballs made from ground beef mixed with raw rice, fresh mint, and egg, dropped into a clear broth with zucchini, potato, and carrot. The crockpot let the meatballs cook gently without falling apart the way they sometimes did on a rolling boil on the stove. Every family had a slightly different version. Some added a chipotle pepper to the broth. Some used yerba buena instead of mint and swore the two were completely different herbs, and that argument never found a winner. The rice inside the meatballs swelled during cooking and gave them a soft, almost pillowy center. The broth was light, but the meal was filling, and it stretched to feed a big family on very little meat. It was a sick day staple, a cold weather regular, and the first thing an abuela made when someone looked pale. Canned soup and boxed broth replaced it in most kitchens by the late 80s. Number 20. Chile verde. Pork shoulder cut into cubes, seared until browned, and slow cooked in a sauce made from roasted tomatillos, serrano peppers, garlic, and cilantro. The crockpot turned this into an all-day affair that needed no attention whatsoever. The tomatillo sauce broke down over the hours and coated every piece of pork in a tangy green blanket. Families in California and the border towns ate this with warm flour tortillas and nothing else on the plate. Chile verde was a proud, simple dinner. The leftovers were even better the next day, rolled into a burrito or spooned over rice. Some families threw in a couple of whole potatoes toward the end so they would soak up the green sauce. The dish never fully disappeared, but the crockpot version, the one that cooked for 10 hours until the pork dissolved into the sauce, is mostly gone from weeknight tables. Number 19. Barbacoa de res. In parts of northern Mexico, barbacoa meant wrapping a cow head in maguey leaves and burying it in a pit with hot coals overnight. Mexican-American families in Texas took that same idea and brought it indoors with the crockpot. Beef cheeks or a whole chuck roast went in with dried chilies, garlic, cumin, cloves, and a splash of vinegar, and cooked on low for 12 hours or more. By morning, the meat was so tender you could pull it apart with your fingers. The fat rendered down into the sauce, and the whole thing became this deeply savory, almost smoky shredded beef that went straight into corn tortillas. Barbacoa Sundays were a ritual in Mexican-American neighborhoods across Texas and the Southwest. The house filled with that unmistakable smell hours before anyone sat down to eat. Families lined up at the kitchen counter, loaded their tortillas, and squeezed lime over the top. Some added pickled red onions, some spooned on salsa verde. The tortillas soaked through with juice, and you ate them standing up because sitting down meant someone else would grab the last of the meat from the pot. Children ran through the kitchen snatching pieces of meat before the adults had even sat down, and nobody stopped them because there was always enough in the pot. The whole neighborhood knew who was making barbacoa that morning because the smell carried across the block. Barbacoa eventually became a restaurant and taqueria item, pre-shredded and sold by the pound in plastic containers. But the homemade crock-pot version, the one where somebody in the family stayed up late to set the timer, and the whole house woke up to the smell of slow-cooked beef, has mostly vanished from home kitchens. Number 18. Manitas de puerco. Pig's feet. Split in half by the carnicero and simmered in the crockpot with dried guajillo chilies, garlic, bay leaves, and whole black peppercorns until the cartilage turned to gelatin and the meat slid off the bone. This was a dish that separated generations. Abuelas cooked it without a second thought, and grandchildren avoided the kitchen entirely when the lid came off and the feet were visible in the pot. The flavor was rich, and the texture, unlike anything else in Mexican cooking, silky and sticky at the same time. Families in the 70s served manitas with pickled jalapenos, sliced white onion, and warm tortillas. Some ate them cold the next day, when the broth had set into a firm, savory jelly. The crockpot was the only practical way to cook them, because pig's feet need patience measured in hours, not minutes. Today they show up at taquerias and carnicherias, but the homemade crock-pot version has all but vanished from family tables. Number 17. Rajas con crema y pollo. Roasted poblano chile strips, sliced onions, and chunks of chicken thigh, all cooked in the crock-pot with a pour of Mexican crema and a handful of melted queso Oaxaca. The poblanos gave it a mild, smoky heat, and the crema turned the whole pot into a rich, pale green stew that clung to everything it touched. This was a dish that showed up in Mexican-American kitchens across the Southwest whenever company was expected, but time was short. You roasted the poblanos in the morning, peeled and sliced them, layered them into the crock-pot with raw chicken and onion, poured in the crema, and walked away. By evening, the chicken had cooked through and the flavors had settled into each other. The cheese melted into long, stretchy threads that pulled from the spoon when you served it. Families ate rajas con crema y pollo, spooned over white rice, or tucked into warm flour tortillas. The leftovers went into quesadillas the next day, the creamy feeling turning golden against the hot griddle. Children who refused spicy food ate this without complaint because the crema tamed the poblano heat into something gentle. In the 1970s, this was a comfort dish that required almost no skill and very little money. A few poblanos, a container of crema, a couple of chicken thighs, and a block of cheese from the market made enough to fill every plate at the table. The crock-pot turned ingredients that cost almost nothing into something that tasted like someone had spent all afternoon in the kitchen. It was the kind of meal where second helpings were expected, and thirds were not unusual. Rajas con crema still appears in Mexican restaurants today, but the crock-pot dinner version with chicken and melted cheese has mostly disappeared from home tables. Number 16. Costillas en chile pasilla. Pork ribs slow-cooked in a sauce made from dried pasilla chilies, roasted garlic, and a touch of piloncillo for sweetness. The pasilla gave the sauce a deep, almost black color and a mild, fruity heat that was nothing like the sharp burn of a serrano or jalapeno. The crock-pot let the ribs braise for hours until the meat pulled cleanly from the bone and the sauce had reduced to a thick, glossy coating. Families in central Mexico and in Mexican-American communities along the border served these ribs over rice with a side of refried beans. The balance of sweet and smoky made this a dish that children and adults ate with equal enthusiasm. Pork ribs in pasilla sauce have mostly been replaced by barbecue-style ribs brushed with bottled sauce, and the original Mexican crock-pot version has faded from home cooking. Number 15. Chiles rellenos en caldillo. Whole roasted poblano peppers stuffed with queso fresco and gently simmered in a thin, savory tomato broth in the crock-pot. This was not the deep-fried, battered chile relleno served at restaurants. The crock-pot version skipped the frying entirely and let the stuffed peppers cook slowly in the caldillo until the cheese melted inside and the pepper softened without falling apart. The broth was light, made from roasted tomatoes, garlic, and a little onion, and it soaked into the peppers during the hours of cooking. You served each pepper in a shallow bowl, spooned the caldillo over the top, and ate it with a fork and a warm tortilla to soak up the broth. This was a Lenten dinner in many families, a meatless meal that still felt substantial. The crock-pot made it possible without the mess of a pot of hot oil. Most people today have never eaten a chile relleno that was not battered and fried. Number 14. Polo en pipián verde. Chicken pieces slow-cooked in a vivid green sauce made from toasted pumpkin seeds, tomatillos, serrano peppers, cilantro, and fresh epazote. Pipián is one of the oldest sauces in Mexican cooking, with roots that go back centuries before Europeans arrived. The pumpkin seeds were toasted on a dry comal until they puffed and popped, then ground into a thick paste that gave the sauce its body and its rich, nutty flavor. The crock-pot was well suited for pipián because the sauce needed time to break down the pumpkin seeds into a smooth, velvety consistency. The chicken cooked slowly in that green bath and absorbed the flavor throughout. By evening, the sauce had thickened, and the chicken was tender enough to serve on the bone with a ladle of pipián poured over the top. Families in Puebla and Oaxaca made versions of this sauce for centuries, and Mexican-American families carried the tradition into their kitchens in the Southwest. The crockpot removed the labor of standing at the stove and stirring constantly to keep the pumpkin seeds from scorching. You set it and let the hours do the work. Pipián verde was often served on special occasions, but in the 1970s, it also appeared as a regular crockpot dinner in families where someone still knew the old recipes. The pumpkin seeds were inexpensive, and the sauce stretched a few pieces of chicken into a meal that fed a full table. Children who grew up eating it remember the flavor as something they have never been able to find at a restaurant. Today, pipián is mostly unknown outside of traditional Mexican kitchens. The sauce requires toasted and ground pumpkin seeds, which most modern cooks have never worked with. And the fresh epazote that gave it its distinctive edge is nearly impossible to find in an ordinary grocery store. The crockpot version of polo in pipián verde has become one of the most thoroughly forgotten dinners on this entire list. Number 13. Tamale casserole. When making real tamales took an entire family, an entire weekend, and more hands than most households had available, the crockpot tamale casserole was the shortcut nobody talked about, but everybody made. Layers of masa dough, seasoned ground beef or shredded chicken, melted cheese, and red or green chili sauce, stacked in the slow cooker like a Mexican lasagna. It baked low and slow until the masa set firm and the edges crisped slightly against the hot ceramic. Nobody pretended it was the same as hand-wrapped tamales tied in corn husks. But on a Tuesday night when the craving hit and there was no family assembly line, it scratched the same itch. The tamale casserole has almost entirely disappeared from home kitchens, and the few people who remember it rarely admit how often they made it. Number 12. Estofado de pollo. A chicken stew built on a base of roasted tomatoes, green olives, capers, raisins, and warm spices like cinnamon and cloves. The combination sounds unusual, but the slow cooking in the crockpot brought every ingredient into balance. The olives added salt, the raisins added sweetness, and the cinnamon gave the broth a warmth that tied everything together. This was a colonial-era dish that survived in Mexican-American kitchens well into the 70s because the crockpot made it effortless. Chicken thighs went in bone-in and came out tender enough to serve on the bone. The sauce reduced into something rich and layered. Families served estofado over white rice and let the sauce soak in. It was a Sunday dinner in homes where someone in the family still remembered the old Spanish-influenced recipes. Today, estofado has been largely forgotten outside of Oaxaca and a handful of traditional family kitchens. Number 11. Guiso de nopalitos con puerco. Pork stewed with sliced cactus petals, tomatoes, onion, garlic, and dried chile in the crockpot, until the nopalitos lost their raw sliminess and the pork went tender. Cactus was free food in much of the Southwest. Families cut petals from the prickly pear growing in their own yards, scraped off the thorns, diced the flesh, and tossed it into the pot. The crockpot solved the biggest complaint about cooking nopalitos on the stove: the sticky liquid they release during the first minutes of cooking. Over hours of slow heat, that liquid cooked off entirely, and the cactus turned firm and savory. The pork flavored the nopalitos, and the cactus flavored the broth, and the result was a stew that tasted like the desert itself. Families who grew up eating this remember the bright green color and the mild, clean flavor. Nopalitos as a crockpot dinner has vanished from most home tables, replaced by store-bought cactus in a jar that sits unopened in the back of the pantry. Number 10. Chuletas de puerco en salsa roja. Bone-in pork chops braised in a smooth red sauce made from dried guajillo chiles, roasted garlic, and a pinch of cumin. The crock-pot softened those chops until the meat barely clung to the bone, and the sauce had reduced into a thick, brick-colored gravy. This was one of the simplest crock-pot dinners in any Mexican-American kitchen. 2 minutes of prep in the morning, and the slow cooker handled the rest. Families served the chops over rice or with refried beans and warm tortillas. The guajillo sauce had a mild, smooth heat that even children could handle. Pork chops were cheap and available at any grocery counter, which made this a reliable Tuesday or Wednesday night dinner throughout the 70s. Today, bone-in pork chops have been overtaken by boneless cuts cooked fast in a skillet, and the slow-braised version in homemade chili sauce has disappeared from regular rotation. Number 9. Arroz con pollo. Chicken pieces cooked directly on a bed of rice, tomatoes, peas, diced carrots, and chicken broth in the crock-pot until the rice absorbed all the liquid and the chicken sat on top of a solid, flavorful layer. This was a one-pot meal in the truest sense. Everything went in together and came out as a complete dinner that needed nothing on the side. The tomatoes dyed the rice a warm orange, and the chicken fat dripped down through the grains as it cooked. Families across Mexico and the Southwest made their own versions, some with olives, some with roasted peppers, some with nothing but the basics. The crock-pot kept the chicken moist while the rice cooked beneath it, catching every drop of flavor. A single pot fed a family of 6, and the leftovers reheated perfectly the next day. Arroz con pollo still exists on stovetops, but the crock-pot version that cooked everything together in one slow pot has been quietly replaced by quick methods and boxed rice mixes. Number 8. Papas con rajas. Potatoes cut into thick rounds and layered with roasted poblano strips, sliced onion, corn kernels, and Mexican crema in the crock-pot. It was a meatless dinner that nobody called meatless because it was rich enough to stand on its own. The crema thickened around the potatoes during the slow cooking, and the poblanos gave the whole pot a gentle, smoky warmth. Families made this on Fridays during Lent and on any other night when meat was not available or not affordable. The crock-pot softened the potatoes completely and let the rajas settle into the cream. You scooped it onto a plate and ate it with warm tortillas, and the meal was done. Papas con rajas was a staple in kitchens where stretching a few simple ingredients into a full dinner was not a challenge, but a daily practice. The crock-pot version has faded from weekly rotation in most homes. Number 7. Enchilada casserole. Corn tortillas layered with shredded chicken or seasoned ground beef, handfuls of shredded cheese, diced onions, and red enchilada sauce, stacked in the crock-pot and cooked until the tortillas softened completely and melted into the sauce. It was the lazy enchilada, and nobody apologized for making it that way. The slow cooker turned it into a true one-pot meal that needed no rolling, no baking sheet, and no oven. You scooped it out with a big spoon like a casserole. The cheese pulled in long strings from the pot, and the tortillas had turned into soft layers of masa soaked through with chili sauce. Families who made this every other week eventually stopped when frozen enchilada dinners showed up in the grocery freezer aisle and cost less effort than lifting a crock-pot lid. Number 6. Carne de puerco con verdolagas. Pork stewed with verdolagas, the wild purslane that grew in yards, along fence lines, and in the cracks of sidewalks across the Southwest. Most people today walk past purslane and call it a weed. In the 1970s, Mexican-American families picked it, washed it, and added it to the crock-pot with chunks of pork, tomatillo, serrano pepper, and garlic. The purslane had a slightly tart, lemony flavor, and a tender texture that held up well during hours of slow cooking. It wilted into the pork stew and gave the broth a bright green freshness that nothing else could replicate. The tomatillo sauce tied everything together, and the pork provided the richness. A full pot cost almost nothing, because the main vegetable grew for free right outside the kitchen door. Verdolagas con puerco was a dish built entirely on resourcefulness. Families ate what grew around them and turned it into something worth sitting down for. Today, most people under 50 have never cooked with purslane and would not recognize it as food if they saw it growing in their yard. Number 5. Polo and adobo. Chicken thighs braised in a thick adobo sauce made from dried ancho and guajillo chilies, vinegar, garlic, oregano, and a touch of brown sugar. The crockpot turned the sauce dark and sticky as it reduced around the chicken over hours. The vinegar gave it a tangy sharpness that cut through the richness of the chilies and kept the flavor from becoming heavy. Adobo is one of the foundational sauces in Mexican cooking, and every family had a slightly different version. Some added a chipotle for smokiness. Some left out the sugar entirely and let the natural sweetness of the ancho carry the sauce on its own. The crockpot version was a weeknight dinner in households where someone still knew how to toast and soak dried chiles properly. You served it over rice or spooned it into tortillas with a handful of pickled red onion on top. Polo en adobo has been quietly replaced by chicken cooked in jarred marinades and pre-mixed seasoning packets. Number 4. Pinto beans with chorizo. A full pot of dried pinto beans slow-cooked with crumbled Mexican chorizo, diced onion, garlic, and a couple of whole serrano peppers tossed in for heat. The chorizo dyed the entire pot a deep orange and gave the beans a smoky, spicy richness that plain pintos could never touch. This was a complete dinner, not a side. A deep bowl of those beans with chorizo, a tall stack of warm corn tortillas, and maybe a wedge of ripe avocado. Nothing else needed. The crockpot let the dried beans cook all day, without anyone watching the water level or stirring. Beans and chorizo were some of the cheapest ingredients in any Mexican kitchen, and together in a crockpot, they fed a whole household until everyone pushed back from the table. Today, canned beans and pre-cooked chorizo have replaced the slow-cooked original in most homes. Number 3. Ropa vieja. The name means old clothes because the long strands of shredded beef looked like torn rags pulled apart by hand. Flank steak slow-cooked with tomatoes, roasted bell peppers, sliced onions, green olives, and briny capers until the beef shredded into thin, savory strands soaked in sauce. Mexican families along the Gulf Coast and in cities with strong Caribbean influence made this in the crockpot as an easy weeknight meal. The meat absorbed the tomato sauce completely, and the olives added a salty punch that set it apart from every other shredded beef dish. Ropa vieja sat at the crossroads of Cuban, Mexican, and Spanish cooking traditions, and in the 1970s, it appeared in crockpots across the Southwest, wherever those traditions overlapped. It has largely been replaced by simpler, faster taco fillings that require no slow cooker and no patience. Number 2. Mexican pot roast. A whole beef chuck roast cooked in the crockpot with dried chiles, canned tomatoes, quartered onions, garlic, and small potatoes. It was the classic American pot roast rebuilt entirely with Mexican flavors. The dried chilies gave the gravy a low, smoky heat, and the potatoes cooked down into the sauce until they were soft enough to split open without a knife. Families served it sliced thick on a platter, not shredded, with the roasted vegetables arranged around it and a basket of warm flour tortillas. This was a Sunday dinner in households where Mexican and American cooking traditions blended together naturally, and the crockpot made it possible to attend morning church and come home to a finished meal waiting on the counter. It was a dish that belonged to both cultures at once. The Mexican pot roast has been quietly forgotten as families moved toward faster cooking methods and stopped buying the large roasts it required. Number 1. Carne deshebrada. Shredded beef, a whole chuck roast or brisket point, seasoned with nothing more than salt, garlic, cumin, and a bay leaf, then slow cooked in the crock pot until it's shredded cleanly with 2 forks. No fancy sauce, no complicated spice blend, no recipe card. Just beef and thyme. The shredded meat went into everything that week. Tacos on Monday, burritos on Tuesday, tostadas on Wednesday, empanadas or tortas on Thursday. By Friday, it was mixed into rice and beans, and nobody complained because it still tasted good. Carne deshebrada was the backbone of the Mexican-American kitchen in the 1970s, because one crock pot of shredded beef fed a family for 4 or 5 days running. Your mother made it on Sunday, stored it in a covered bowl in the refrigerator, and pulled from it every night until it was gone. That kind of cooking, where one slow pot became an entire week of dinners, without repeating the same plate twice, is something most families have quietly left behind. Every one of these dinners started the same way. Somebody woke up early, plugged in the pot, and trusted the hours to do what no shortcut could. That trust came from watching their own mothers do the same thing year after year, with nothing but cheap cuts and long patience. If your family made any of these, leave the name of the dish in the comments, because somebody else out there is trying to remember the exact same recipe. Hit that like button if this brought something back. Share it with someone who grew up in that kitchen. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time so you do not miss what we bring next.